He lived a life that most people would call quiet, maybe even ordinary. From the outside, his house looked like any other on the street. Neat lawn, a few flowers by the doorway, and a small American flag that waved gently whenever the wind blew. Neighbors often waved hello as they passed by, some stopping to chat briefly about the weather or weekend plans. He would nod politely, sometimes exchanging a few words, always friendly, always calm. No one would have guessed that behind that calm demeanor lay someone with a past that could make even the toughest criminals pause in fear. Every morning he would wake up before dawn. There was a rhythm to his life that he followed like clockwork. He brewed his coffee the same way, black with just a touch of sugar, then sat at the small kitchen table by the window, watching the sun slowly rise. The soft light falling on the neighborhood gave him a sense of peace he had learned to cherish. He would read the local news, check messages, and sometimes jot down a few thoughts in a small notebook he kept tucked in the drawer. No one knew what those notes contained, and he preferred it that way. He worked at a small company not far from his home. His colleagues knew him as dependable and quiet, the kind of man who got things done without complaining. He had a reputation for solving problems efficiently and staying calm even under pressure. People liked him, though most didn't really know him. That was fine with him. He liked it that way. He enjoyed the simplicity of life, the predictability of it. He didn't need anyone to know his history, and he didn't need to prove himself. His home was his sanctuary. The walls were adorned with pictures from a life most people would never imagine. A few framed medals, certificates, and awards sat neatly on a shelf, but he never boasted about them. There was a photograph of him in uniform, standing tall with other men and women all wearing serious expressions. It was a reminder of a time when life was far less predictable and far more dangerous. Yet now, in this quiet suburb, the uniform seemed like a distant memory, almost like it belonged to someone else entirely. He enjoyed simple routines. In the evenings, he would take long walks around the neighborhood. He knew every street, every crack in the pavement, every tree and lamppost. He would nod to neighbors walking their dogs or kids playing outside, offering a small smile. To them, he was just a quiet man who kept to himself, friendly but distant. Sometimes he would stop at the park nearby and watch the sun dip below the horizon. He liked the way the sky turned shades of orange and purple. It reminded him that no matter how chaotic the world might get, moments of peace always existed, waiting to be noticed. Despite this calm life, he never let his guard down completely. Even in peace, he remained vigilant. It wasn't paranoia. It was habit, a mindset formed during years of training and experiences he had gone through. He had learned to observe everything, notice the smallest details, and think several steps ahead. It was a part of who he was, even if no one around him had the faintest idea. He didn't have many friends, not because he didn't like people, but because his past made deep connections complicated. He valued loyalty and honesty, and he could sense when someone wasn't genuine. Most people were fine with superficial interactions, but he craved something more real, even if he didn't always find it. Still, he found comfort in routine and solitude. He had everything he needed in his home, his work, and his quiet walks around the neighborhood. Sometimes, he would hear stories from neighbors about crimes in other parts of the city, stories about break-ins, assaults, and gang activity. He would listen politely, nodding at the right moments, but his mind would always wander slightly. He knew that the real dangers were closer than most people realized, and he had a sense of preparedness that was always there, lurking under the surface. He didn't flaunt it, didn't announce it, but it was a part of him, woven into the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. Life had taught him patience. He knew how to stay calm when situations demanded it and when to act swiftly if necessary. These were lessons learned over years of experiences that had taken him to places most civilians could never imagine. Yet here, in his peaceful neighborhood, he applied those lessons quietly. He didn't need to demonstrate his abilities to anyone. To him, strength was not about showing off. It was about being ready, being disciplined, and knowing when to act. He enjoyed small moments of happiness that others often overlooked. A warm cup of coffee in the morning, the sound of birds outside his window, a clear sky on a calm evening. These simple pleasures grounded him, reminded him that life didn't always have to be about danger or challenges. He had fought battles he preferred not to think about, and now in this quiet life he cherished tranquility more than anything else. Evenings were his favorite time. He would often sit on the porch, the soft hum of distant traffic in the background, the faint smell of freshly cut grass in the air. He sometimes imagined what it would be like if the world could stay this peaceful forever. He knew that peace was fragile, and perhaps that's why he appreciated it so much. He had seen what could happen when chaos took over, and he valued the calm that now surrounded him. Neighbors sometimes wondered why he didn't join community events or socialize more. He had reasons that were simple yet profound. He wasn't antisocial. He was careful. His life had taught him that appearances could be deceiving, that not everyone could be trusted, and that it was wise to keep certain parts of oneself private. He was polite and friendly, but he guarded the truth about who he really was. There were hints of his past in the way he carried himself. His posture, precise and alert, gave away a disciplined mind. His movements were deliberate, each step measured, each gesture intentional. To someone paying close attention, it was clear he wasn't just an ordinary man. But most people didn't notice. Most people assumed he was just quiet, maybe shy. They had no idea that underneath the calm exterior lay someone who had survived situations that most could never imagine. Even in mundane activities, there was a sense of order and precision. When he cooked, he followed steps meticulously. When he cleaned, everything had its place. Even the way he maintained his car, checked his tools, and handled small repairs reflected a mindset trained for discipline and attention to detail. It wasn't something he consciously showed. It was simply who he was. Despite the quiet, there was a fire within him that rarely needed to be unleashed. It was a controlled fire, tempered by patience, intelligence, and experience. He had learned the hard way that power without control was dangerous. And he had control, absolute control over his mind, his body, and his actions. He had honed that control through years of training and experiences that had demanded nothing less than perfection. Sometimes, when he walked in the evening, he would notice shadows or movements in the distance that others might ignore, a flicker of light, the sound of a car engine starting too quickly, a figure lingering too long near a corner. He observed, calculated, and noted without alarm. This was instinct, second nature, a survival skill embedded in him long before he settled into this peaceful neighborhood. He didn't talk about the past, and no one pressed him. And perhaps that was part of the reason people liked him. He was interesting yet unobtrusive, mysterious yet approachable. He was a quiet presence in a noisy world, someone who didn't need validation from others to feel complete. And that made him someone rare, someone who could live among people and yet carry the weight of experiences they could not even begin to imagine. At the end of the day, he would often sit on the porch, drink a cup of tea, and watch the world slow down. The sunset painted the sky in soft oranges and purples, and he felt at peace, if only for a little while. He reflected on the life he had chosen, the calm he had fought to maintain, and the discipline that had become his second nature. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what came his way, he was ready. Even if no one around him realized it, he was ordinary in the eyes of the world, polite, calm, friendly. Yet beneath that ordinary exterior was a man shaped by danger, trained to survive and capable of extraordinary things. It was a secret he carried silently, a truth that he didn't need to share, yet one that would soon prove crucial. Little did anyone know. The quiet man they waved to every day was not just a neighbor. They were living beside someone who had mastered the art of survival, who had faced threats that could terrify even the strongest, and who, if pushed, could protect himself and others with unparalleled skill. But for now, he was just a man enjoying the peace he had fought so hard to earn, unaware that this calm life was about to be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. The quiet night air had settled over the neighborhood. The street was calm, the kind of calm that made people feel safe, even though danger could be hiding anywhere. He sat on his porch sipping his tea, watching the soft glow of streetlights fall on the pavement. The crickets were singing. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment everything seemed perfect. He enjoyed these evenings, simple and peaceful, moments where the world felt manageable. He had no idea how quickly that peace was about to shatter. From across the street, a group of people slowly gathered, their voices low but sharp with anger. They were strangers to him, men who had spent years feeding on prejudice, allowing their hatred to grow unchecked. They were loud, rude, and full of destructive energy. Their footsteps on the pavement were heavy, deliberate, almost predatory. They looked at his house as though it belonged to someone beneath their notice. someone they thought they could intimidate and humiliate without consequence. It started with shouting. The voices, coarse and filled with malice, echoed through the quiet street. They hurled insults and slurs, mocking the man sitting calmly on his porch. They kicked over garbage cans, threw empty bottles, and banged on fences. He remained still at first, observing them carefully. His calmness did not come from fear, but from experience. He had learned long ago that reacting too quickly in anger could make situations worse. He understood that patience and observation were often more powerful than immediate retaliation. Neighbors peered out of windows, their expressions a mix of fear and confusion. Some whispered to one another, wondering why the gang had chosen this particular house. They were unsure what to do, frozen by shock. They had never seen anything like this in their usually peaceful neighborhood. The sound of breaking glass and the shouts of the attackers filled the night, unsettling even the bravest souls. Yet he sat there quietly, his mind already analyzing the situation, noting every detail, the number of people, the positions they moved in, the sounds they made, even the rhythm of their footsteps. Inside the house, he could hear the faint scrape of a chair being thrown and the crash of a window shutter. It was a deliberate attempt to intimidate him, to make him feel unsafe in the place he had always called home. Yet he did not panic. His training, though long in the past, had not left him. Years of facing danger, of expecting the unexpected, had prepared him for moments like this, and he relied on that experience now. He kept calm, letting the intruders underestimate him, letting them feel that he was weak when in reality he was far from it. The gang grew bolder. One of them threw a rock at the front window, shattering the glass with a loud crash. It startled a few neighbors who gasped and whispered behind closed doors. But he did not flinch. Instead, he quietly closed the blinds and moved to a safer position inside the house, remaining calm and deliberate in every step. He was not panicked. He was calculating. He observed how they were spread out, noting weak points in their formation, noticing who seemed the most aggressive, who was just there to follow. They shouted more insults, trying to provoke him. Their voices were rough, their words cruel, and their energy threatening. They tried to shake his composure, believing that their aggression would force him to react. But he remained seated, calm and deliberate, allowing their hatred to reveal itself fully. He could see the patterns in their behavior, the way fear and anger were mingled in their movements. Every action they took was predictable because they were driven by emotion, not intelligence. Suddenly, one of them approached the front door, banging on it with a crowbar. The sound echoed through the night, a warning of the destruction they were willing to cause. Yet he did not panic. He knew that violence often carried consequences, and he had learned the value of control. He watched, calculated, and waited. His heart rate remained steady. Every muscle in his body was relaxed but ready, poised for action if necessary. The gang thought they were intimidating a helpless man, but in reality they were stepping into a situation they could never handle. He called the police, but he did not rely solely on their arrival. He had learned that sometimes help might come too late, and preparation was crucial. While speaking calmly to the dispatcher, he continued to observe the gang, noting each person's movement, each sound they made. His voice was steady, even soothing, as though he were talking to a neighbor rather than coordinating with authorities during a dangerous situation. He understood the importance of remaining composed. Panic only escalates chaos. The gang grew frustrated when he did not react. They threw more objects, kicked at doors, and shouted louder, trying to provoke anger. Their frustration became evident. They were no longer organized, their aggression spilling over into recklessness. It was in this chaos that he saw their vulnerability. Their lack of discipline and strategy made them easy to anticipate, and he could see that any confrontation would give him the upper hand if necessary. Neighbors were watching in fear, unsure if they should intervene or hide. Some considered calling more help, but the gang's sheer intimidation was overwhelming. Broken windows and the smell of smoke from a knocked-over candle added to the sense of danger. Yet inside he remained calm, composed, and in control. He understood that fear was a tool that could be turned against aggressors if wielded correctly. He prepared for the worst without panicking. Doors were checked, and items that could be used for protection were quietly placed nearby. But he did not brandish weapons unnecessarily. His knowledge of the situation, his discipline, and his intelligence gave him an advantage that the gang could not even imagine. To them, he seemed ordinary, even weak, but in reality he was quietly assessing, preparing, and controlling the situation. One of the gang members tried to climb a fence to reach the backyard. The creak of metal and the rustle of leaves sounded loud in the night, but he anticipated this. He silently moved to a position where he could intervene if necessary. He did not panic or lash out. He waited for the precise moment. His experience had taught him that sudden actions could backfire, while calculated moves ensured control and safety. The gang became bolder, unaware that the quiet man in the house was far more prepared than they could ever guess. They broke a fence, threw more objects at the house, and attempted to intimidate him by making noise and creating chaos. But every action they took only revealed more about their recklessness. Their aggression was predictable, their behavior emotional, and their discipline non-existent. He watched them, noting the patterns and the mistakes, knowing that if the confrontation escalated, he would be ready. Even as chaos surrounded him, he remained human, grounded in his humanity. He thought about his neighbors, the people who were watching in fear, and the importance of resolving the situation without unnecessary violence. He had been trained to handle danger efficiently, but he also understood the value of restraint. His goal was to protect himself, his home, and his community, not to escalate anger or hatred. Hours seemed to pass like minutes as the gang continued their assault. Their energy was raw and chaotic, but he stayed composed. Every sound, every movement, every change in their rhythm was noted, cataloged, and understood. He knew that inexperience and hatred could lead them to make mistakes. And mistakes could be used to control the situation, to protect lives, and to end the threat quickly. Finally, he saw a momentary lull in their aggression. Some members hesitated, unsure how to proceed, frustrated that he did not respond as they expected. He recognized this hesitation as an opportunity to control the situation without unnecessary violence. Calmly, quietly, he prepared himself, knowing that soon he might have to act. But for now, observation, patience, and control were his allies. The night stretched on, but he remained alert and composed. The gang's energy was starting to drain, their attacks becoming more erratic. They did not realize that the man they had targeted was far from ordinary. They did not know that beneath his calm exterior lay someone who had survived and excelled in environments far more dangerous than a vandalized neighborhood street. They assumed weakness. He carried strength, intelligence, and precision. As the first hints of dawn appeared, their frustration peaked. Their shouts grew louder, their actions more chaotic, but he was ready. Not yet reacting with force, he continued to assess, position, and prepare. His calmness was his power. His restraint, his patience, his control over the situation, all of it made him dangerous in ways they could not comprehend. The night had tested them, but it had also revealed them to him, making their next move predictable. He knew that the peace he had built in his life was under threat, but he was ready to defend it. He was ready not just to protect himself, but the neighborhood, the innocent people who watched in fear, and the quiet life that he had fought so hard to maintain. The night had shifted, the danger was clear, and the calm man in the house was no longer just a silent observer. He was prepared, he was poised, and soon the truth of who he really was would become impossible to ignore. The night had been long, but he remained steady, calm, and aware. Inside his home, the quiet man who had spent years in dangerous places was now fully alert, his senses sharp, and his mind analyzing every detail. Every sound from outside, every movement in the shadows was noted and catalogued. He had spent hours watching, waiting, and planning, understanding that the chaos outside was the perfect opportunity to reveal just how much he had prepared for situations exactly like this. He remembered his training vividly, even though it had been years since he last wore the uniform. The drills, the missions, the long nights in foreign lands, all of it was etched into his body and mind. His muscles remembered what his mind sometimes barely acknowledged. Every step he took, every movement he made inside the house reflected years of discipline and experience. He did not have to think about it. It was instinct honed to perfection. The gang outside was growing reckless. Their patience had worn thin, and their frustration was turning into mistakes. They shouted threats, threw objects, and made noise that betrayed their nervousness. But he noticed the patterns in their behavior. The way they moved, the way they spread out, the way they hesitated at times. It all told him who was leading and who was just following. He could anticipate their next move because he had learned long ago how to read people in dangerous situations. He remembered one of the hardest missions from his past, when he had been deep behind enemy lines, far from support, in a hostile environment where mistakes meant death. That mission had taught him more than any textbook or classroom could: patience, observation, calculation, and control. He drew on those lessons now in the quiet streets of his own neighborhood, as the gang outside tried to intimidate him. The circumstances were different, but the principles were the same. Inside, he moved silently. Every step was precise, deliberate. He checked the doors, made sure all entry points were secure, and quietly prepared areas where he could respond if the gang forced their way in. He didn't panic, and he didn't act aggressively. Instead, he relied on knowledge and skill, understanding that overreaction could escalate the situation unnecessarily. His training had taught him that real strength was knowing when to act and when to wait. The gang had no idea what they were up against. To them, he was just a quiet man who didn't fight back. They assumed weakness because he did not respond to their insults or provocations. But in reality, he was calculating. He was thinking several steps ahead, predicting their moves and preparing to respond with precision if needed. Every member of the gang was exposed. Every action they took visible to someone who had survived far worse than this. He remembered the discipline of his team in the military, how every member had a role, how every mission depended on coordination and focus. Now he was alone, but the lessons remained. He understood positioning, timing, and strategy. He knew that in chaotic situations, the strongest person is not always the one who shouts the loudest or moves the fastest, but the one who remains calm, observes carefully, and acts with certainty when the time is right. The night air was thick with tension. Outside, the gang's frustration grew. They had thrown rocks, broken windows, and screamed insults, yet he had not responded. Their aggression had become chaotic, disorganized, and more dangerous to themselves than to him. They underestimated him completely. Their lack of discipline was evident, their lack of preparation obvious. He watched silently, noting each flaw and weakness. He began to move strategically inside the house. He positioned himself in a way that allowed him to observe every entry point, without exposing himself unnecessarily. His movements were silent, almost invisible, a reminder of the countless hours of training and missions where stealth had been life itself. He was preparing for the possibility of confrontation, but he was not rushing. Patience was a weapon in itself, and he wielded it carefully. Memories of his time in the military came back clearly. The long nights on watch, the missions that required absolute focus, the adrenaline that came with danger, all of it resurfaced now as a tool for survival. He remembered how to read intentions in a person's movements, how to predict actions from small details, how to remain calm even when surrounded by chaos. These were not just memories. They were skills he could still use, skills that the gang outside had no idea existed. He thought about the neighbors watching nervously from their windows. They had no idea who he really was, and he wanted to keep it that way. He wanted to protect them without drawing attention to himself. Violence, when necessary, would be precise, controlled, and final. There would be no chaos, no unnecessary harm. That was the difference between someone trained and someone reckless. The gang was reckless, and they had underestimated the quiet man in the house. The sound of footsteps, the clatter of objects, and the shouting outside created a rhythm, and he learned to anticipate it. Every time someone raised their voice or threw an object, he noted it mentally. Which way they moved, how they reacted to others, where the gaps in their formation were. His mind worked like a chessboard, planning several moves ahead, always thinking, always observing, always prepared. Despite the tension, he remained human. He thought about the unnecessary hatred fueling these attacks, about how misguided anger could lead to destruction. He felt no hatred toward them, only understanding that they were driven by fear and ignorance. His calm was not just tactical, it was moral. He wanted to end the situation with minimal harm, to show that strength was not only about force but also about control. As the hours passed, the gang's energy began to wane. Their movements became more erratic, their strategy non-existent. They were emotional, reactive, and predictable. He saw that their mistakes were increasing with every shout, every thrown object. His awareness allowed him to plan, to prepare, to know exactly how to respond if necessary. The quiet man in the house had become the observer, the strategist, and the protector all at once. He moved quietly to another position in the house, one that gave him better visibility of the front yard. From there, he could see each member of the gang clearly. He watched how they communicated, how they hesitated, how they reacted to one another. Even small details, how someone adjusted their stance, how they glanced at the others, gave him clues about what they would do next. He felt in control, and in that moment, control itself was a kind of power. The gang did not realize that patience and observation were his allies. They assumed that aggression would force a reaction, but he knew that power came from restraint, from waiting for the right moment to act. He had learned that in life or death situations, the person who panicked lost. The person who remained calm, even in the face of chaos, prevailed. That calm was his advantage, and he used it fully. He reflected on his past missions, recalling how he had handled hostile environments, unpredictable enemies, and dangerous situations. Each memory reminded him that fear was a tool, not a weapon. Anger was a weakness, but patience was strength. Knowledge, awareness, and control were more powerful than brute force. And now, in this quiet suburban street, he had all three. Hours passed like minutes. The night stretched, but his calm never faltered. The gang outside became tired, frustrated, and careless. Their attention was scattered, their movements disjointed. He had observed them fully, and he knew that the right moment to act, if necessary, would soon arrive. Until then, he remained quiet, precise, and in control. Even in this tense moment, he remained human and empathetic. He thought about the wasted lives, the ignorance, and the anger that drove the gang's actions. He did not wish harm unless it was unavoidable. His skills were for protection, for survival, and for justice, not revenge. That moral compass, combined with his training, made him deadly not only because of his abilities, but also because of the way he chose to use them. By the time the first signs of dawn began to show, the gang's energy had almost completely faded. Their shouts were fewer, their attacks less coordinated. They had underestimated him completely, thinking that silence was weakness. But in that silence, he had seen everything, learned everything, and prepared for whatever might come next. He moved carefully to a final position inside the house, one that gave him a full view of the street. From there, he could monitor every movement, every attempt at aggression. His mind was calm, his body relaxed but ready. He had not yet acted, but the night had demonstrated one undeniable truth. He was in control, and he had the skill, patience, and intelligence to manage any escalation. The quiet man in the house had become more than just a neighbor. He had become a guardian, a strategist, and a force no one could predict. The gang had entered the wrong house, targeting someone they assumed was weak. But they had learned, whether they realized it or not, that appearances were deceiving. Patience, observation, and discipline were often more dangerous than anger, and he carried all three within him, fully prepared for the confrontation that was still to come. The first light of dawn began to touch the rooftops, softening the darkness that had held the neighborhood in suspense all night. The gang, exhausted from hours of shouting, breaking, and trying to intimidate, had started to slow. Their energy was raw, uncoordinated, and desperate, but to the quiet man inside it was the perfect moment to act, not out of anger but out of necessity and control. He had watched, waited, and prepared. Now the time for observation was ending, and the moment for action was approaching. He moved quietly, each step deliberate, each movement controlled. Years of training and experience guided him naturally. He did not rush, did not panic, and did not make noise that could give away his position. Inside, the house was quiet except for his steady breathing and the faint sounds of movement outside. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of motion had been studied. The gang had underestimated him completely, and that would soon cost them. He positioned himself strategically near the front entrance, where he had a clear line of sight to the yard and street. From this spot, he could see every member of the gang clearly, their gestures, their expressions, their shifting positions. He noted the strongest, the most aggressive, and the hesitant. He could anticipate their next move because their behavior, driven by emotion and frustration, had become predictable. The chaos outside had played into his hands. The gang made their next move unaware of how carefully he was watching. One of them approached the front yard again, carrying a broken plank from the fence they had destroyed earlier. Another followed behind, throwing stones and shouting insults. Their overconfidence and recklessness were evident. They had no idea that patience, observation, and strategy could be more powerful than brute force. They were about to meet someone who had mastered all three. He remained calm. His mind ran calculations as naturally as breathing. If they moved this way, he could respond by positioning himself here. If they shifted to the left, he would adjust accordingly. Every movement was planned, every action deliberate. He did not need to shout or intimidate. His control of the situation was enough. Even in this moment, his humanity guided him. He wanted to neutralize the threat without unnecessary harm, to end the chaos efficiently and protect everyone around him. As the gang advanced, one of them tried to climb over the low fence at the front of the house. His movements were slow and uncoordinated. He reached halfway before slipping, and the quiet man inside was already aware of it. He did not intervene aggressively. He simply positioned himself to control the situation if needed. The man climbing hesitated, unsure of what to expect. The quiet man's presence, unseen but calculated, created a tension that the intruder could not sense fully. But it was there, silent and heavy. Another member of the gang threw a rock, smashing the front window further. The sound echoed sharply in the neighborhood, waking a few early risers. Most people peeked cautiously through blinds, unsure of what they were witnessing. They saw a group causing chaos and a calm, silent figure inside the house, seemingly unafraid. Little did they know that the calm was not weakness but preparation, and that the man inside was far more capable than anyone outside could imagine. He had memorized every position of the gang members. Their impatience, frustration, and lack of discipline had revealed openings. He could predict where they would move, how they would react, and what mistakes they would make next. This was not guesswork. It was training and experience guiding every observation. Every breath they took, every gesture, every sound contributed to the mental map he had created over hours of careful study. Finally, the moment came. One member of the gang, frustrated beyond reason, rushed forward, swinging the broken plank in a wild attempt to intimidate. The others followed, emboldened by his reckless aggression. It was the precise moment he had been waiting for. Years of training kicked in. His body moved with speed, precision, and efficiency that was almost invisible to the untrained eye. He acted not out of anger, but because the situation required it. He used the environment to his advantage. The furniture, the walls, even the narrow space of the porch became tools. He moved with skill, positioning himself where he could respond effectively while minimizing risk. He neutralized the immediate threat with control and efficiency. Every action was deliberate, designed to end the aggression without unnecessary chaos. The gang, caught off guard, began to realize that they had underestimated the man in the house. One by one, their movements faltered. The quiet man's discipline and calm contrasted sharply with their reckless energy. They had assumed that their numbers and noise could overpower him, but they did not account for his training, experience, or ability to think several steps ahead. Panic began to creep in, visible in their gestures, in the way they stumbled and hesitated. Every mistake they made was another opportunity for him to maintain control and protect his home. The gang tried to regroup, shouting, swinging, and throwing objects, but their disorganization was their undoing. The quiet man moved with purpose, neutralizing threats efficiently while remaining fully in control. His calm presence created confusion and hesitation among the attackers. They had never faced someone so disciplined, someone who could respond so precisely without being reckless. Each action he took was measured, deliberate, and effective. Neighbors watching from behind their curtains began to understand, in small ways, that the man inside the house was not ordinary. They saw a calm figure controlling chaos, managing threats that would terrify most people. They saw someone who did not panic, who did not lash out blindly, and who acted with purpose and precision. Fear of the gang was evident in their posture and expressions, but respect, though unspoken, began to form for the quiet man inside. The gang's aggression continued, but their confidence was eroding. They had no strategy, no plan, only emotion and anger. Every attempt to intimidate, every shouted insult, every broken object all worked against them. Their lack of control was obvious, while the man inside maintained absolute control over himself and the situation. It was a lesson in discipline versus chaos, patience versus impulsiveness, and strategy versus reckless aggression. At one point, a member of the gang tried to run to the side yard hoping to flank him, but the quiet man had already anticipated it. He moved silently to the window nearest the side, observing and adjusting his positioning. When the man emerged, he was met with a presence he could not read, a force that was calm, precise, and unyielding. The intruder hesitated, unsure of what to do next. That hesitation was enough. The quiet man had neutralized the threat without unnecessary confrontation, demonstrating control that the attackers could not comprehend. Hours of preparation, observation, and patience culminated in this moment. Every movement, every decision, every pause was part of a plan that required no violence beyond what was necessary. The gang, exhausted and confused, began to scatter. Some ran, realizing that they had underestimated the man inside. Others froze, unsure of what to do next. The quiet man maintained control, ensuring that no further escalation occurred. He did not act out of vengeance, nor did he seek to humiliate. His goal was simple: to protect himself, his home, and the neighborhood. Every decision reflected his discipline and intelligence, lessons learned in environments far more dangerous than a suburban street. He remained calm, human, and precise, demonstrating that true strength is not about aggression, but about control, awareness, and responsibility. As the sun rose fully, painting the sky in soft golds and oranges, the gang finally retreated. Their attacks had ended, but the lesson had been clear. The quiet man in the house was no ordinary neighbor. He was disciplined, prepared, and capable beyond what anyone could have imagined. His calmness, patience, and skill had turned a chaotic, dangerous situation into a controlled resolution. Neighbors slowly emerged from their homes, eyes wide with awe and cautious relief. They saw the damage, the chaos, and the aftermath, but they also saw the calm, unshaken figure who had restored order without escalating violence unnecessarily. They realized that strength, when paired with intelligence and discipline, could protect an entire community. The quiet man stepped outside briefly, surveying the street. Broken glass, scattered objects, and traces of the gang's aggression were visible, but no further danger remained. His presence radiated calm and reassurance, a silent message to the neighborhood. Peace could be restored and threats could be handled without losing control. He had protected not just his home, but the people around him. He returned inside, finally allowing himself a moment to breathe. The tension that had held him for hours began to release, but he remained alert, aware that danger could appear again at any time. His mind replayed every moment, every movement, and every decision, not with pride, but with careful analysis. He had acted precisely as needed, balancing strength with restraint, discipline with humanity, and power with control. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the night lingered. People would talk about the chaos, the aggression, and the calm man who had handled it all. They would remember that quiet presence, that sense of control, and that lesson in patience and discipline, and they would know, even if only subconsciously, that appearances can be deceiving. The calmest person, the quietest neighbor, might also be the strongest, the most prepared, and the most capable. The morning air was calm, the sun now rising slowly over the neighborhood, washing the streets with golden light. The chaos of the previous night had ended, and a quiet settled over the area like a gentle blanket. The gang that had caused so much trouble had retreated, scattered by the calm, precise, and disciplined response of the man in the house. Though the neighborhood was still in shock, there was relief too. People peeked cautiously out of their windows, observing the damage, but more importantly, observing the quiet presence that had restored order. Inside, he moved slowly through his home, checking on the broken windows and scattered objects. The destruction was tangible, but it did not disturb him. He knew that material things could be fixed. The safety of life and peace of mind could not. He thought about the events of the night, replaying each moment carefully in his mind. He had acted with precision and control, not out of anger, but because the situation demanded it. Every decision he had made had been deliberate, every action measured, and every moment of patience had paid off.